about. Trying to figure out what it's all about. Existentialist, am I worth anything or just this gown? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Spending time all alone, sending my songs to the phone, dreaming of a better home while focused on trying to hone this craft, witchcraft. I hope the blue hearts let this last. I don't know.
That was the great sounds of Watson with Outside on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. Myself, Prestige, with my partner in crime, Long Island raised, Elm City made, EZ Bluez is in the building. EZ Bluez, you are better with introductions more than me. Who do we have with us stay on behind the brand?
You want to know something? We're all just dealt with this whole pandemic thing, right? And in that time, that 18 months to 2 years of being locked inside your house, in your own universe, you get to pull up a chair with all of those thoughts you've been avoiding for years upon years upon years. From that, we've had these amazing breakthroughs to show people just how important mental health is. Because of that, we have the great resignation, where people are starting to understand that they are more valuable than what I want to be nice about the word that I want to use, more valuable than what the powers that be want to pay them. I'll put it there. And because of all of that, as we continue to go through every cycle upon cycle, as we continue to unpack the traumas that have helped us create this armor to move forward, we continue to become more in touch with exactly who we are and who we are meant to be. Mental health is so, so, so important. You know, a couple of years ago, even the idea of taking a mental health day was laughable. Now it is common practice, and I love that people are finally getting the help they need to move forward. And that is why we have absolutely the most amazing guest to have on for this topic today. A.Jaiza Jones, I want you to put your hands together, not if you're driving. If you're driving, keep your hands at 10 and 2. We don't want any accidents. Okay, 10 and 2, responsibility. And there's a lot of responsibility in taking care of your mental health. So A.Jaiza, or Jai, as we were saying earlier, welcome to the show. You are currently on mute, so please actually say something.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So great to be here. Yeah,
Awesome.
No, love that intro and looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to have you here, and it's incredible. Now, what for you? I guess what's your origin? Huh?
Origin story.
What is your hero origin story? Like, what was like, hey, I want to get into therapy?
Yeah, my origin story. That's a great question. I mean, to be honest, I never would have expected myself to end up here. I mean, so part of it is when I went to college, what I ended up studying was African American studies and anthropology. And so essentially what that is, in my school, African American studies was essentially like critical race theory. So it was really about understanding racial identity development in this country, right? And a little bit as well about kind of exploring just kind of social realities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I paired that with anthropology, which is essentially like the study of how we as human beings make meaning, right? Like how we make meaning in our lives, collective practice, ritual. One of the things that kind of give us meaning, and how do we understand that? So how do we understand ourselves, the ways that we're perceived? How do we perceive others, right? All of those things, and how they kind of intersect and connect. So that's what I was doing in undergrad. And I kind of figured I would like go into a PhD program. I was a part of this program that was like supported underrepresented students with kind of like continuing higher ed. So I was like on this track to do that. But then was also kind of like, I don't know that I'm really here for that either. You know, like I'm kind of interested in that, but also, you know, I grew up working class and was like, that feels like a long time to be able to, I need something to fall back on. You know, I was kind of like, I need something to fall back on. And so I took a break after college and went into doing some nonprofit work and really started working with, I moved to Brooklyn, actually, New York. And so was doing some nonprofit work there, but then also was doing some community-based volunteer work. So this was like 2009. So like stuff like Twitter, that
Yeah.
was new, right? It was like brand new. So I was like
Hmm.
a social media like intern for this organization called the Black Girl Project, which was essentially like out there to uplift young Black women in Brooklyn from ages like 12 to 25. And I was like their social media intern. And really what that meant was like create their Twitter account, right? Like tweet every now and then because it was like brand new, right? Um, but I was like, I would go to a lot of their events and, hang out with a lot of these like young Black women and just saw so many of my own experiences reflected in theirs of just kind of navigating, so many things, racism, sexism, poverty, right? And was really just starting to see the impact on mental health. So that was kind of my entry point into wanting to know more, was kind of starting
Hmm.
to think about that in my own family, my own, you know, especially some of the women, in my
Right.
family and
Hmm.
starting to kind of be like, yeah, I would like to know more. So that was what kind of got me into being like, okay, I think maybe what I'm going to do is start with social work. And I thought I'd go into policy stuff. And then it was like the clinical stuff that really interested me. And that's kind of the origin story, I suppose. And the rest is history. I kind of just continued to grow in that area.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's awesome, and I love the fact that you came from it from like an anthropology background, because I do personally feel a lot of our traumas are actually based in the societal programming, as per
Mhm.
what the people are trying to push these norms on us. That at the end of the day, we are still animals, and we can't necessarily have those type of norms that are there, but they are kind of forced upon us as per that's what is right, or as upon one other person's opinion of a moral line or a moral code. Um,
Absolutely.
so I think that is awesome, and I'm glad that you came from that point of view there, because it just means that I might be onto something, or I might be crazy, and that's fine. I'm fine actually with both, with both outcomes. If nothing else, the descent into madness is just as cool as being right about something, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're definitely onto something. You're definitely onto something there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as you're doing this, and you're getting involved in the social medias in Brooklyn, and different things upon that aspect, what was really the switch that, as you're doing the non-for-profit, you realize that, one, you find commonality with some of the marginalized communities that are out there, and two, what made you decide to be a voice for those communities?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, part of it was just also the issue was like seeing some of the hardship, right? Or
Hmm.
just like the reality of life, right? We go through um suffering, right? We go through things that are challenging. And then exactly like you were saying, I think that we can't tie it from our social realities, right? Because we live in a society that sometimes is also giving us these messages that we're not good enough, like based on
Hmm.
who we might be, based on identities that we have, right? So then something, I was also seeing was that access to mental health services, particularly for marginalized communities, was so messy, right? Like, just to try to get, support for, young people to be able to access the care that they need. And then also to see themselves reflected in the care that they're getting, right? So to be able to
Hmm.
meet with someone maybe who has a little bit of a lived experience that shapes the way that they practice, or they show
Hmm.
up in terms of providing, mental health care can be incredibly important, even if only as an entry point, right? To kind of be like, because I think we started to talk a little bit about, I think in your intro, you're kind of beginning to hit on stigma, right? And
Hmm.
mental health, there's a ton of stigma, especially, in communities of color, marginalized communities. And it's not unwarranted, right? There's a lot of medical racism, there's a lot of,
Of course.
histories of like, you know, oppressive systems that have not been affirming or friendly, to marginalized communities. So I think in a way that stigma or that mistrust is warranted.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I think as we're starting to really kind of break those through some of those things by kind of changing some of these systems, right? I think an entry point sometimes can be, oh, okay, so maybe like I kind of see myself reflected in you. I'll give this
Right.
a try, right? I'll give this a try. Um, so that was a big part of it too, was just kind of access, right? I think in my
Hmm.
own experience, and also just like, working with these communities, and trying to support these young women, and also noticing that, that there wasn't much out there, for them, and the care that was available sometimes was hard to get connected to. So, mhm.
No, that's a huge point, and I wish more people sat in that for a couple minutes, because it's relatively easy for someone who looks like me to walk into an office, or a doctor's office, and see people who look like me in those type of things, and it's the term that really kind of rolls through as these entire couple of years of just interesting spiral that we've been going through as a teenager in the eyes of all the nations. If people forget, we're still a teenager as a nation. So we're definitely in our punk rock rebellious type of stage. You can tell by the tightness of Prestige's pants. We are 100% more into that. We're gonna hit emo in like another week or so, but it'll be fine.
Really tight.
Like super tight. It's crazy. But we hit these kind of these hiccups, and these past couple of years have been it has been very much in the face, when things have mainly stayed hidden for a very long time. And a lot of that has to do with obviously social media, with people carrying phones on them so you can get real-time stuff from a part of the country you didn't even know existed, up until you saw that stream. So again, this is not things that have just started happening this week. These are things that have been going on upon going on upon going on for years upon years. When the tragedies first started happening, and there was the story about the young man who was shot and beaten to death by the father and the son. I was reading the Thelonious Monk book, and they were talking about a similar story from, I believe, 1940, where a young man was beaten to death by a father and a son for racial terms, and that was 70 years ago. Where we're telling the same exact story, but now that we are telling them a lot quicker due to social media and due to the 24-hour news cycle that has become everyone being able to do what needs to be done on social media, it's coming to light faster, and I think we are starting to address them. I don't think we're dealing with them correctly, but I think we're starting to at least address them more and more, and we are being forced, and I'm a big fan of being forced to confront those past traumas, because as much as it is the same for our mental health individually, us as a community, and I do mean community, the entire thing, those who don't like us, those who do like us, those who are allies, those who are enemies, we are still in a community. Whether you love or hate each other, we are still in one giant community. And we need to learn how to grow together. And even those that don't agree with us are at least seeing this on a regular basis. So it's getting harder and harder for them to deny. And I think that is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. I just obviously wish this, happened 60 years ago. It'd be a lot easier to deal with, at least, for other aspects. And that's coming from someone that hasn't had to live with it on an everyday basis, hasn't had to wake up with it, hasn't had to apologize just for being. Hasn't had to live by certain type of rules just to make sure you make it home from school alive. So if it's resounding finally to the palm-colored people like myself, I can only imagine, what the marginalized communities are feeling right now. Do you see that there is now more of an allyhood, or do you see it starting to dissolve?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Yeah, well, I also just really appreciate, what you shared, because I think you're bringing in already, like, kind of thinking about intergenerational trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how that impacts, exactly what you're saying, like, worries, like being, like, am I dressed in a way that makes me maybe hopefully non-threatening, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
what are these markers that maybe indicate that, I get this a lot because I work with college students. Like I wear a
Mm-hmm.
backpack everywhere I go just so that they'll know I'm a student because they may assume I'm not, and you never know what can happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the impact that that can have on one's sense of self and mental health, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I hear you kind of saying, like, as you were talking, that's just what was coming up for me, that intergenerational trauma too, of that 40 years ago, and there was a family, who was impacted by that. There was a community who then kind of, you know, there's the generations of that loss, of that grief,
Mm-hmm.
of that memory, of that fear, of that trauma, that we inherit in this way, right? Along with the resilience, right? We inherit the resilience
Mm-hmm.
too, but we also inherit that trauma. So yeah, so I just really appreciate what you were sharing. And I think something in turn, it's hard, right? I think that definitely in a way, I do feel like there is a collective consciousness happening, particularly, and I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of like hypothesizing because in a
Mm-hmm.
way, the pandemic is was a collective is right a collective trauma that we've all been kind
Mm-hmm.
of moving through, this kind of like global collective trauma, right, that we've all been moving through, we've all been impacted by in different ways, right, has had a unique impact, but it's touched all of our lives, right. I
Right.
mean, there's been a lot of loss, loss of people, loss of plans, loss of, so much. So that in itself is kind of this, and I do think it's kind of maybe created this environment where I think about the summer. Um, so this pandemic is happening, and then we have the murder of George Floyd, right?
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
I saw how even just like in some of the communities that I'm a part of, where things like white supremacy or anti-blackness or racism almost felt like a bad word. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, it was like people were having these conversations, right? And so, on one way, I do feel like there is this moment that's kind of happening where conversations around like things like police brutality, or even so it's Trans Awareness Week this week.
Mm-hmm.
So even things like you know trans rights, right? There's like kind of this like collective consciousness happening where it's starting to enter like a little bit of a collective consciousness. Like it was always true, it was always happening,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of like, I think what I'm seeing is there's like a shift around like it really kind of starting to enter this consciousness in a way that people are starting to pay a little bit more attention, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
At least, and I see that even on like I've seen that in some of the professional settings I've been. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where, because once you start to see things like it starts to influence capitalism, then you're kind of like, oh, it's entering a little bit of a collective consciousness here, even if it's superficial, right? Like we're kind of working with it. So that's a whole other thing. But I think I've started to see corporations kind of be like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, everybody gets Juneteenth off, stuff
Right.
like that. You know what I mean? So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
there's something happening. And
Amber, I mean, Jai, you're right. There
yeah,
is something happening on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. Myself, Prestige, and my partner in crime, Long Island Raised, Elm City made EZ Bluez is in the building. I hope you didn't lose your train of thought. Continue what you were saying because you were on a roll. You can go right ahead right now, Jai. Continue.
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, no,
No
so
problem.
yeah, I feel like there's something happening, and I think um, and it's complex, right? I think that definitely
Mm-hmm.
there are some hearts and minds and perspectives changing. And then also, I think we still just have to be vigilant and hold
Mm-hmm.
some of these systems accountable too, to like where are we moving, where are we heading, right?
Right.
So both and I think that was a
Yeah.
complicated answer.
So it was. It was a complicated question, so it works out
Yeah.
well. And which is great because that's going to lead me to another complicated question. How important is it? Well, because look, I'm 100% transparent. People know my oldest identifies as trans. So this is something that I'm engaging on an everyday basis, and one of the things I'm teaching them and trying to help them as they're along their experience is to, even in those moments where it doesn't feel like it's a full victory, understanding that the historic trauma and understanding how a couple of years ago, even this maybe was a no, is also a victory to appreciate, while still holding accountable to get what is the equality that is deserved. Still have to appreciate those smaller victories. If not, you're going to live your life angry, and then everybody else wins. You know, because then they are controlling how you feel. And I try to tell my children all the time, what makes anybody more valuable than you? Nothing. So why do you allow them to control your day and your mood? So that's one of those things that we confront on an everyday basis. And look, I'd love to say that I'm phenomenal at this, but 9 times out of 10, I'm failing at that, and I'm going to be angry, and I'm going to kick the things, and I have so many stubbed toes because of aggravation. It's ridiculous. But I'd rather stub my toe than go to jail, because hatred makes me. I got an allergic reaction to hatred and ignorance. It makes me break out in handcuffs. So I try to very hardly stay away from those type of things. So how important is it to hold on to those small victories? Is really what I was trying to get to.
No, definitely. Also, how lucky is your kid to have you? That's what's up. Like, how lucky is your kid? Like, I'm out here for the trans youth, especially LGBTQ, genderqueer, trans, gender nonconforming youth. I appreciate what you're sharing, because I actually, like, when I see our young folks and the ways that they are moving towards self-identification, and moving toward really leaning into embracing who they are, even if there's lots of questions around it, right? I think that reminds me of those victories, right? I think that reminds me of, of the intergenerational resilience, right? We kind of talk about the trauma, but that's the resilience too, that there's so many young people who are really embracing themselves at an age, at a time where 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like you said, the maybe was a no, right? It just, there was no space for it. There was no language. There was very little language for it. There was a very little awareness of it, right? So absolutely. I mean, I think, absolutely. I think, particularly like as we're living with like marginalized identities, I think that there is a lot of pain, right? There's a lot of pain. It's hard to experience hate. It's hard to experience discrimination. It's hard to feel like you're coming up against barriers. There's a lot of societal messages that are negative that I think we have to work sometimes with. Exactly kind of what you were saying is like, kind of like, is that my voice or is that somebody else, right? Like working with not internalizing it, kind of like, wait, whose voice is that? I don't know that that's my voice about, how I know myself to be, right? And so that's part of the reality, but then there's also so much joy, right? And there's also community. Community has been so important as we navigate, trauma and hardship. There's so much love, right? I think, again, I just love what you shared about parenting, a trans kid, and how, like, though that micro interaction has a macro impact, has a huge impact on countering, those myths and lies that society sometimes can tell us. And so absolutely, yeah, absolutely what you're saying. I think those small victories often end up being big internal wins, right? Because I think they sure us up and remind us that we're not always going to find our resources externally, but we can sure up our internal resources through affirmation, through surrounding ourselves with community, right? Not waiting for the system to change before we accept who we are, right? So, yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question.
Jai, what
Yes.
kind of things you prepare to go into a psychological assessment as a social worker?
Yeah, so it depends, right? So like I guess it depends. It depends. So it kind of depends on like why someone's coming in, right? So So there's lots of different types of assessments. So sometimes someone might be wanting an assessment for like a learning difference or something like that, right? So I don't really do that type of assessment, but I do
Okay.
do just kind of like general mental health assessments. Um, and really what they typically look like if we're talking about kind of like a first appointment, um, it's kind of like usually I would ask the person I'm with, kind of like what made them come, you know, like what
Of course.
inspired you, right? Because I think already there's it's a risk, you know. I think it's a risk to try to kind of be like, okay, I'm gonna meet with this stranger
Mm-hmm.
and tell them some of my business, you
Sure.
know. And so
Sure.
sometimes you kind of, there's a lot that goes into being like, okay, now is the time for me, right? So I think when people find that they're ready to give like therapy a try, especially if it's something new, um I think it can be really important to honor that, right? So kind of like, why now, you know, like what made you um come here now, right? And then definitely exploring over time, just I think it's really about understanding the person's perspective, like on
Of course.
themselves, on their life. So doing a little bit of like information gathering, like so we usually do a little bit of a history, learning a little bit about maybe family. It can be important
Mhm.
to know a little bit about. I think we've been talking about things like intergenerational trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Intergenerational resilience, right? Also, just from our families, we really learn our caretakers, right? So as you know, as kids, our caretakers are really the first people that help us understand ourselves and the world and emotions, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's in a way that is problematic, right? Or kind of, or, you know, um, healthy, right? And for a lot of us, there's a bit of both, you know, in our family systems, right? So it's kind of like those are the first kind of our first teachers, right? So sometimes, yeah, doing some things like exploring some family history, exploring some mental health history, um, depending on the age, maybe exploring things like just like what they're up to, how they got into what they got into,
Mhm.
but really kind of focusing specifically on, you know, what it is that you're wanting to explore, wanting to talk about. Like, what are some of the things that you're hoping to identify as areas that you'd like to grow into, right? So I kind of see counseling as like really just deepening a relationship with yourself, right?
Mhm.
And so, what are some of those areas, right? Yeah, did that answer your question, Press?
Oh yes, it did.
Oh,
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely,
okay.
nailed
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, you're doing incredibly well. But
Yeah,
I
okay,
really want
cool.
to know, just in your personal opinion, everybody's different. Everybody has a different way of life. Everybody has a different way of thought. Do you truly believe therapy never ends, or
Mm.
do you believe short term, you can have some of those conversations and instantly feel better? Everybody's different when it comes to this question. I want to hear your point of view.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
Yeah.
You know, I am of the mind that so I really, so I'll share a little bit. So the way that I kind of frame the way that I practice
Hmm.
is really client centered, and it's relational, right? So and what that really means is that um, you know, one of the most important things for all of us is to really be seen, right? To like to be seen, right? And to be um to feel valued, right?
Mm-hmm.
To really be able to be seen, right? And I think that sometimes when people have, again, I think experienced hard experiences or have moved through situations where there has been harm, um, that can be not always true of their experience of really feeling like they're seen and they're valued. And I think building a relationship with someone, particularly, I think building a relationship with a therapist, sometimes can really provide a space or a corrective experience about being in relationship with someone, right? Because you're kind of sitting with someone. The hope is, right, is that you're sitting with someone who is really centering your experience, and hearing about, you know, so many things, you know, the ups, the downs, the parts of yourself that maybe your shame or sadness or difficulty, and then also the parts where you're like, I'm out here, I'm, you know, I'm awesome, right? Those parts too, right? But holding all of it and doing that without judgment, right? That's the hope, right? Without judgment. And um so that there's an experience where you can say something where there's like a lot of, emotion or shame or whatever it is around it, and put it into the space, and we're kind of like, okay, it's here now, right? And we don't, and we're working with not judging it, right? And so letting go, of some of that. And so that is, I think, important to the frame that I work with, is like, so I think
Mhm.
that kind of the therapeutic relationship itself can
Mhm.
be a really important part of treatment, right? I think it can be really foundational, to because the hope is when a client leaves and they're out in the world, right, that they
Right.
can begin to internalize that sense of non-judgment, right, can begin
Mhm.
to internalize that sense of like, I felt seen in that moment, or or I was able to let myself cry, and usually I don't do that, right? So that's kind of the hope. So in terms of like short and long term, my frame is kind of like, it's really up to the client, right? So I think
True.
it depends on like what people are coming in with, right? I
Mhm.
think sometimes people are like, there's something really specific. Like I had a very specific, like I got into a car accident. Like I've noticed that driving, I feel really anxious now.
Mhm.
And that's what I want to focus on, and really just need a few sessions to process that, right? And then
Mhm.
it's something,
Mhm.
sometimes it's more complex than that. Kind of like I've been experiencing kind of like anxiety or depressed mood or whatever it is for a
Mhm.
long period of time. And I'm trying to understand, it's not really situational. It's probably like there's a lot of things, right, that kind
Mhm.
of maybe contribute to that. I also just want to say that, again, um, hardship, just like joy, happiness, sadness, is a part of our lives. It comes and
Mhm.
goes,
Mhm.
right? So I also think it's cool for people to be like, I got what I needed here.
Mhm.
And then 2, 3 years later, maybe they experience a loss, maybe they lose their job, maybe something happens, right? And it might be important to have a little bit of a support to move you through that,
Mhm.
if you found therapy to be supportive in the past, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of my sense. I tend to not be so rigid about it, like in terms of like,
Right.
and I know a lot of therapists can be like 6 to 8 weeks, that's what we do, or it's like forever, that's the other end of the spectrum, or it's like forever, you meet weekly, go to therapist forever. But I think I'm usually a little bit more like flexible and depend on the client, because I feel like
Yeah.
across our life cycle, things like anxiety, things like depressed mood are human.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
human. We're going to experience it. And so a therapist can be someone that you work with briefly, or you work with kind of long term, or you develop a relationship and you kind of go in and out, where you're kind of like, I think I'm good for now. I'll come back in 3 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or whatever it is. Yeah.
You're a human being too. You're an awesome human being. Um, your mind can go elsewhere too. Who do you seek to for that emotional help, for that mental help? Yourself, your partner, anybody, a trusted individual, because every mind is different.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question too.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
for me, I really recommend for people who are going into
Mhm.
healing work, mental health work, to do that work yourself. I
Mhm.
saw this meme on Instagram the other day that said like, you can't really do light work without shadow work.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
yeah, and so,
Mhm.
and I really resonated with that. I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
so just to say that I've really prioritized my own mental health, and that was new to me. The first time I saw a therapist was when I was in grad school,
Yeah.
Mhm.
learning how to be a social worker. But it was instrumental. I mean, I've been in therapy. I've had, worked with a therapist for many, many years, and also have gone in and out and have had different therapists because I've moved around, Um, but yeah, no, I think it's been really important to understanding myself,
Yeah.
understanding my own healing, right? Understanding, um, making amends with things in my life that are really hard that I can't change, right?
Sure.
And so I do think that, I think it's so incredibly important to engage in, our own kind of mental health work if you're going to be a helping professional, right? Or like a mental health professional. Also, community, I've learned over
Yeah.
time. I used to be someone like back in the day, like, I got this, I'm independent, need nobody, right? But now I'm like, no, community is important. And my community has shown up for me in ways
Yeah,
that I've really needed during hard times, right? And that includes my partner. It includes family, chosen family and bio family, right?
absolutely.
It includes, friends, right, who've become family. And there was a part of me that had to let them in, right? I think that
Hmm.
for a while, again, it was like, I got this, I don't need anybody, right? And that's a lie, right? That's a myth. We need people, right? And community is imperfect, right? It's
Right.
imperfect too, but we grow, right? We grow together. So that's been important. I'll also say for myself, spiritual practice has been really important. I do a
Mm.
lot of meditation.
Of course.
Um, I've learned a lot from Buddhist practice.
Hmm.
I've learned a lot just about that's really resonated, as a grounding place for myself sometimes. And so really kind of engaging in meditation practice has also been uh, a huge support, especially in times where you're kind of like, nothing makes sense, right? And that, spiritual practice doesn't always have the answer, but at least to be like, nothing makes sense. And like, and that there's a little bit of like, but we're all in this together, something like that, can sometimes be just really healing. So I would say those are like my probably the top ones, for me, if the way that I kind of support myself and my own mental health.
And that's great to hear, Jai. But we are in this together, just like myself and Eve, like a great team here on this broadcast. I see his face turning bright red with
Oh
the
yeah.
thumbs
Oh
up.
yeah. This is.
I believe you want to say something, man. Go right
Oh,
ahead.
oh yeah. Well, no, it's really interesting because I too, in unpacking life and all those kind of things, I
Right.
find a lot of a lot of amazing wisdom in Eastern philosophies.
Hmm.
You can find, and it lands in almost every single science, whether you're reading the Dancing Lulu Masters to talk about string theory and physics, or you sit there and you sit with the I Ching or the Musashi's Book of Five Rings. You can find these different type of aspects, and a lot. I will go as far back as the amazing Eastern philosophers Brandon Lee and Dolph Lundgren. They were in this movie called Showdown in Little Tokyo, and they were sitting in the car and talking about how Brandon Lee, his character, learned martial arts, and he said, well, my mom wanted me to have a piece of my culture, and it was either that or floral arrangement, and I didn't want to arrange flowers. And Dolph Lundgren looks at him. He's like, wait, you arrange flowers? He's like, yeah, you cannot be the warrior unless you're creating as much as you destroy. You need to
Hmm.
have that balance. And I just think it's really, really interesting when someone who actually went to the schools for it and did the work is like, yeah, no, Eastern philosophy is really, really important for mental health. I'm like, oh, I only needed to get a $1.99 rental thing from Blockbuster. This is amazing. Good job.
$1.99 from Blockbuster and this broadcast on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. Behind the brand, myself, Prestige, and my partner in crime, Long Island raised, Elm City made, EZ Bluez is in the building. We got the awesome Jai Jones with us. Easy, continue. I believe you have more questions to ask my friend right here. Actually, my family, my cousin. Go right ahead.
There you go. There you go. Well, that's. I find it really, really interesting that we're starting to see this more and more and more. Do you think this is just what was once old it becomes new again, or are we finally breaking down those multicultural barriers?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to name and acknowledge that it isn't new. Like that, yeah, like these like a meditation is not new. I mean, you like find
Mm-hmm.
that now, people are talking a lot, particularly like mental health circles and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
about mindfulness and meditation and absolutely, I think it's important. I think what is missing though, in a lot of those conversations or some of the literature that comes out on it is that
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement of that there's lineages, right? That this is like ancient, this is like
Mm-hmm.
thousands of years old, right? some of this philosophy that folks are incorporating into practice, right now. So I do wish that we'd see more of that acknowledgement, because then I think that is where we can slip into appropriation sometimes, right? Like, and I think if we're able to really name, like, this is the lineage, like this is like really honoring that you didn't just come up with this, like, like there are
Right.
people, who have been doing this a long time, and cultures, right, who have been practicing, this a long time. And so sometimes that can be a bit of a disconnect that I wish, we were able to bridge a little better, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think, um, in terms of the something old kind of becoming new, I think, yeah, I think it's kind of like, what was old is still old. But we just need to acknowledge it, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I think that we can say, like, these are practices that have been supporting folks. And then also, I think for me, and in terms of like my spiritual life, I was kind of saying that there are times when just kind of sitting with, I can't change this, but there's like comfort in knowing that there's like a community of people that goes back thousands of years who also were like, suffering is real, right? And that there's an end to it, or whatever it is, right? And that we're going to do what we can to lessen harm that we put into the world, right? And sometimes that's comforting, as like thinking about the past, and that this has been true for thousands of years, right? So yeah, I mean, it's great that people are getting more into it, but I wish there was more of that connection, to like exactly what you were saying, like
Yeah.
That it's not like, oh, we just came up with this. It's like, it's just been out here for a long time. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, it just shows that we as a society were really bad on research papers going through, because we didn't footnote anything. And then when we lose the art of footnoting, we become culturally appropriating, and that is bad. So I try to put as many footnotes as humanly possible.
I feel you.
Well, no, it's important though. Like it's super important. I've gone through this whole journey of trying to understand. I think everyone's like hatred kind of comes down to an original point of hurt. And when you can sit there and try to understand that person's original point of hurt, you can then start to unpack and help fill up, that, because that cup is full of hate, and you can only have so much room in the cup, but the only way to dump out any of that is to get an understanding and to help that person move forward. Your cousin and I kind of do that through radio waves, or just by like talking to the random people we run into in the streets, but you're engaging this as an active full-time life. And I kind of want to give you your flowers for that, because it is not easy carrying the burdens of others, and you sit down with the burdens of others on an everyday basis. We have a tendency to want to run from our own demons, and here you are, ready to sit down and, help vanquish the demons of others. And that's huge. And understand that you are, I joked around with the origin story to start it off with, but I wanted to come full circle with that and say, you are a superhero, and you need to own that superherodom.
Thank you. No, that's so nice of you to say. I'm gonna put that on my resume. Vanquish the demons of others.
Go ahead.
Yes.
And work. Own it.
But
just make sure you footnote me. Just make sure you footnote me. You don't want to appropriate it.
Right. Right. Vanquish the demons of others. All right. I can say, okay. Yeah. I love that. But I do want to say too, I really, really like, the longer that I practice, mental health work, I am amazed by people's capacity for healing, right? I mean, I think I say this all the time, like to my clients, and I think it's important that I remind myself too, like, I don't heal people, right? Like, I don't make change, like people make change, right? And I can be, people can come to me as a support with saying like, so I want to make some changes. Can you help keep me accountable, or can you offer this or that,
Mm.
right? Or can you be with me through this process? But it's really, people who make change. And so it's always my honor to just bear witness to that and be with people through that. And so people are superheroes, right? Because I'm like, they're the ones who, I think folks who choose to say like, I am going to, again, particularly when we're new, meeting and it's new, it's kind of to say like, I'm going to kind of take this risk and sit with a stranger until we start to get to know each other and lean into things that are hard, to talk about things about myself that are hard to look at in the hope of my own growth, right? Of my own growth, and to just kind of feel more grounded and rooted in my life and to get to know myself better. That is huge, that is huge. And I think if we can lean into doing more of that, of really like understanding who we are and forgiving ourselves and, having compassion for ourselves, that's where compassion will flow for others, right? So I appreciate you and you saying that. And I also have to uplift like, that people are incredible, and people's capacity for healing is incredible. And I'm honored kind of to support folks who are ready to make change,
No, I really like how you highlighted that it's your own responsibility to be happy. No one else's. For you to be truly happy and personal happy, it's your own responsibility. I think as your position, you can correct me if I'm wrong, cuz you are that reminder. You're that reminder to that person, everything that they can change for themselves. But it's their responsibility to be consistent with that change. You can help them with that change, but it's their responsibility because it's their responsibility to own it up for themselves. And I'm really happy that you highlighted that. But easy, you're doing this, say something.
No, I'm soaking it all in.
You're soaking it all in. Sorry, sorry.
I was soaking it all in.
The little signals.
Yeah, no, not at all. No, because I think all of this is amazing, and these are the conversations that need to be had over and over and over and over again. To help us all move forward. I was also thinking that if I go like this, I kind of rock the mustache look, and I'm thinking maybe I want to just go with like the 70s mustache for like 2022 is just going to be like mustache. I'm not like sure. No, I want like the 1970s one, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Look at it. It works. It works. That's really where you caught me. I'd like to say that I was finding something profound, but I was really looking at myself.
Multitasking in thought. I got you.
Yes, I was multitasking. My bad. I had an ego moment. I apologize. I had an ego moment.
Those are allowed. That's okay.
but no, it's absolutely remarkable, and I love because there are so many parallels with mental health and addiction. And I 100% do feel that the only time, someone who is suffering with the disease of addiction can, grow from it is when they are ready to get the help they need for themselves. If you are doing any of this mental health thing for someone else, 9 times out of 10, you're setting yourself up for failure because at the end of the day, that person, life is a revolving door. People are going to come and go no matter what, no matter how community-based you are, no matter how bound you are. At the end of the day, we all have expiration dates. And that's just the reality of it. There's 2 things in life you can count on: death and taxes. So it's true, right? It's sad.
Love you, Harry, but we're not going to say that on radio.
No, we're not. I was thinking it though.
Love you, Harry, but we're not saying that on the radio.
No, but we have these different types of moments, and you need to make sure that you are 100% doing this for yourself. And by doing that, it can be the biggest hurdle because, and I want everyone. This is the point in time where I say, pull over your car, take out your pen and a piece of paper. The biggest lesson from this entire hour of this amazing conversation is, please, everyone understand you are worth your own investment. And when you invest in yourself, you invest in your mental health, you invest in growing, you invest in becoming healthy, then you can then fully take on, and that small ripple of you dropping that pebble into that mental health pond can fully go into it. But make sure you're doing it for you, because you are the only you have, you know, and we don't 100% know what happens when the candle gets snuffed. And maybe we all just want to sit and enjoy each people's lives that much more. But unfortunately, we are getting that Apollo hook because the time is flowing. Sandman is officially jumping up on the stage. At this point in time, we want to give our audience every single way to get in contact with you or any type of organizations you work with. This time is yours. Thank you so much for having these conversations. Thank you so much for doing what you do.
Yeah, no, thank y'all. I so appreciate I've loved this. Yeah, I've loved this. And just to echo just where you both landed, absolutely. I think again, you know, making that decision, whatever it is that motivates you, right, to make change or to kind of say, you know, I think it's time for me to just kind of spend this time with myself or invest in myself. I love that. Can be so incredibly important, you know. And I also do want to highlight that it's not without challenge, right? I think making change is also hard, right? So absolutely, I think it's something I just want to encourage folks that, you know, it's something to as you're learning to invest in yourself or kind of moving toward, you know, really realizing that again, you're worth this, right? To also know that real change and real healing does move us through some pain, right? But I think that we can look through and kind of say, but there's something for me, you know, moving through this versus running away from it, right? There's something for me if I can. And that's what a therapist is, right? Is kind of to work with you to move through, you know, that when we confront those things, there are hard things that sometimes we're confronting. And that's where the self-compassion comes in. That's where the self-forgiveness comes in. That's where the non-judgment comes in, right? So absolutely, like the change is in, we have agency to make change. And I also want to acknowledge that sometimes it can be hard, which is why support, you know, is important. That community support, spiritual practice, whatever it is, right? Can be really important. And so yeah, in terms of how to get in touch with me, so I'm actually licensed in Connecticut. I'm licensed in California as well. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I have a website. That's probably the best way to learn more about what I'm up to. And so that's www.jaizajones.com. So that's just my name in between the website. So www.jaizajones, JAIZA
Awesome. Thank you for getting up early in the West Coast to be with us, Jai. Love you. Appreciate it.
No doubt. Anytime.
And
Thank y'all.
It's great to know y'all. It's great. You already know what I'm saying. On WNHH LP 103.5 FM New Haven. Myself, Prestige, the Easy Bluez. Thank you, Jai, on Behind the Brand. Appreciate you.
Thank y'all. This was great.